Okay, we are live. So great. Welcome to Tamarah's Closet today. I'm really excited today. I have an exciting guest. And actually, I think I stumbled on him on social media somewhere, and I think it was an ad maybe on Instagram. And I'm really thrilled to have him here today because he showed up at a time in my life where I was really yearning for more inspiration. I was kind of feeling in one of those blocks, those artistic blocks. And so he is a professional photographer with over 20 years of experience, and he's actually commissioned by leading global companies for his precise attention to detail and his exquisite control of light. And you're going to see that in some of his photographs today. He's recognized as an expert in the industry. He's a global ambassador for Hasselblad Camera Company, Broncolor Lighting, Adobe, and Manfrotto. And what I love about Karl, what drew me to him, other than his beautiful work, is his ability to shoot across all genres of photography. And in my opinion, he's an expert at all of them. So I've just been really excited about that. So I want to go ahead and bring him out. So I want to give a warm welcome to Karl Taylor to Tamarah's Closet. Karl, are you still with me?
I'm still here. I'm still here.
Good. Okay, Karl, I'm so really thankful and grateful that you took the time to do this today. And you really did come to me at a time where I was seeking more inspiration. And I am really enjoying your workshops and being a member of that because they're truly giving me some new hope and new inspiration. And so I just am very grateful for that. But I want to get in the interview because I know you're a busy guy. So I always like to start with the family background. And I'm
Sure.
just curious, did you come from a family of artists or creatives, or is that just all you?
Well, actually, my mother was a painter, not a professional painter, but she was actually a very good painter. She used to paint oil paintings. She used to do a lot of science fiction paintings, actually. And I remember growing up as a small kid, seeing her paint and, admiring her pictures. So I guess there is that element, yes.
Yeah. Now, is she still alive? Is she still painting?
Yes, yeah, she's alive, but I don't think she's painting so much now. She's kind of retired, and she lives in France actually now. And yeah, I don't think she does paint anymore. She does have some of her paintings still on her wall in her house and stuff, because I've seen some of the paintings that I obviously remember from when I was a kid, but I haven't actually seen her produce any new work. So no, I'm not sure. I know she's actually quite keen on photography as well, so she still does a bit of that, but just on a sort of amateur enjoyment hobby level.
Yeah, right. Well, that's really great. So you do have some artistic background. So, you're very, very creative. And I was curious as to what maybe your earliest memory is in your childhood that you knew you were creative, or maybe that your parents or someone in your family noticed you had a very creative abilities.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good question because actually, I was extremely interested in art and painting, especially as a young teenager. I think when I started secondary school, which I think in America you call high school, so from the age of 11 through to 16, I was developing my drawing skills. I used to do a lot of pencil drawings, but very detailed pencil drawings. And I suppose when I was around 14 or 15, I was really into artwork at school. And I also moved into doing paintings, some abstract paintings, and trying different genres of art as well, So I was doing some graffiti art on metal panels. I was doing oil painting art, I was doing drawing, and just experimenting with different types of art, and encouraged by the art teachers and the art department at school. And yeah, so I've always had an interest in art, but obviously that switched over to photography.
Yeah. Do you still draw a little bit at all, or?
Not on any quality level, I would say. I still sketch ideas.
Okay.
So if I'm designing a photograph, which is what I do for most of my work, is I kind of design my pictures. So I kind of have an idea for a picture, I design it, and most of the time I will produce a sketch of what I have in my mind, because that helps me calculate how I'm going to build the photo, how I'm going to light the photo, how I'm going to make the photo. But they're very rudimental sketches. They're nothing special. It's not like when I used to draw. I mean, it's been since my teenage years that I've done any proper sort of painting.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. But that fascinates me. I've always wanted to, be able to, I can do abstract stuff, but I'm not like an artist. Like I
Yeah,
cannot do that.
I was always interested in high detail. So when I was drawing and painting, I was always trying to produce stuff that looked realistic.
Yeah.
And I think when I discovered photography, that the ability to create things super realistic through photography is why I became so involved and addicted to photography.
Okay. Okay. Well, I like that word addictive because it is addictive.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Well, were your parents, were they very instrumental in like encouraging you to delve into your creative side, from the beginning, and or did you, or because some parents have their own ideas. I know I've interviewed a lot of artists and their parents tried to get them not to do the art field because they thought they were going to be broke or something like that. So
No, not particularly. My parents actually separated when I was about 12 or 13. And
okay.
then I grew up actually with my dad and my brother. And my dad was running his own business, and he was quite a busy guy. So we were kind of left fairly free to do what we wanted to do. And I was into all the usual stuff, skateboarding and bicycles and fishing and everything else. And I just continued doing my art really more through school than anything else. So no, I wasn't actively encouraged, or I wasn't discouraged either. I was free to choose.
Okay. Well, that's good though. And I
Yeah.
mean, I think that's good. That's probably why that freedom, I think, opens up your creative channels, I think, for sure.
Yes.
Um, do you remember how old you were when you picked up your first camera, and maybe what your first camera was,
Yeah,
or?
absolutely. Well, we can look at it two ways. The first way is that I picked up a camera, like a small compact camera that my dad had, and I was shooting pictures on this tiny little camera, obviously using film. And I was sort of just going out, enjoying shooting sunsets and pictures as a teenager. And sometimes I was just taking pictures so that I could actually then paint them as paintings later. The first time that I picked up a proper camera, like an SLR camera, was when I was 17 years old. And that was a Minolta X700 film camera. And the first roll of film that I put into that camera, and I was using it had a 500 millimeter mirror lens, they're called. It's a catadioptric mirror lens. And I was loaned this camera and lens. And I went out and I shot some pictures. And the first roll of film I shot was a horse galloping on a beach that I saw. And it was beautiful backlighting and light coming off the water. And I shot these pictures through this telephoto lens. And then when I got the film back, I was like, wow, this is amazing how the horse was frozen in mid-gallop, the beautiful light sort of twinkling off the water behind the horse. And I was really excited about these pictures that I was seeing. And I thought, wow, that was amazing. It kind of did for me what I always wanted in my art, and that was to reveal really high level of detail. So that was at that age, at 17, was when I really, that was it. I now wanted my own photography equipment, my own lenses. I wanted to push forwards with this. And that's where I kind of digressed from painting and drawing fully into wanting to do photography.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I noticed you had a show coming up, or I don't know, maybe I've missed it, with horses, or you were having.
Oh, that's a workshop actually that we're running. I'm working with a very famous photographer called Tim Flack.
Okay.
He is a very famous fine art photographer, animal photographer, and we're actually running a workshop together where he's going to be photographing a horse in my studio.
Okay.
And another animal as well, and I'm going to be demonstrating advertising and product photography techniques. So that you probably saw that on my website, which was basically just an advert for that workshop.
Okay, because I was just wondering if you had a passion for horses.
No, not really. I mean, Tim does. He's obviously photographs lots of different animals, but for me, I'm actually passionate about product photography, still life photography. Most of my work is advertising. I do a bit of fashion stuff as well, but my passion is for controlling lighting and making objects look really nice with light. So that's my main passion in photography.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. I just saw that and I was like, I wonder if he likes horses.
Yeah. No, I guess it's kind of a coincidence, but no, I don't think I've actually photographed a horse since that time when I was 17 years old. So no, it's just a coincidence that Tim is going to be shooting the horses.
Okay, well, cool. All right, that's good. What great photographers, like, I don't know, from the past or even maybe some today, that have inspired you the most? That you?
Oh, there's lots. Yeah, lots. There's lots of them actually. I remember when I was 17, 18, learning photography and now sort of trying to learn everything I could about photography. There was a famous photographer called Bob Carlos Clark. He's dead now, but he was very famous black and white fashion photographer. Some of his work was a little bit seductive and a little bit provocative, but I really liked the contrast in his black and white images and the styling of his images. Then there was the guys, I used to always read National Geographic magazine and admire the photographs. So there was Jody Cobb from National Geographic, Steve McCurry, Sam Abel. And I was fortunate enough actually to meet Steve McCurry a few years ago and had a chat with him, and a really nice guy. Really enjoyed that conversation because I've always admired his work and the simplicity of some of his images, but yet they're so powerful and effective. And he's a long time National Geographic photographer. So he was one. Irvin Penn is a very famous photographer whose work I've also admired. Patrick Litchfield is another great portrait photographer. There's a guy called Galen Roll. Galen Roll was a landscape photographer. He was one of the pioneers, I would say, in landscape photography, especially in mountains. He used to shoot, I think he was like an avid mountain climber, and he used to shoot the most spectacular landscapes. And I think his landscape photography, even to this day, is better than any that I see now. He's still got something about his work. I would say Galen Roll, and unfortunately he died in an airplane crash some years ago, but I would say that Galen Roll's work, he was like the modern day Ansel Adams, but I mean, say modern day, back in the 80s sort of thing. And then there was another photographer called Stephen Dalton, who was a British photographer who did very detailed images of insects and frogs and birds. And he used very special techniques for special high-speed flash to freeze owls in flight or kingfisher birds diving into ponds. And so he developed these very special types of flash to freeze wildlife. And that always kind of fascinated me. And I think that's one of the reasons that I enjoy using fast flash duration work to freezing liquids and other objects in the air as well. So yeah, there's lots and lots of different photographers that have inspired me. over the years. Even Tim Flack, who I'm doing the workshop with, is one of my favorite photographers. And I've been fortunate enough as my career has grown that I've actually been able to meet, some of the photographers that I admired when I was younger. Yeah.
Oh, that is a blessing. God,
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
that's great. So, God, you've got a whole list of them. I think that's fabulous. I think that's what makes you so good, is that you've studied a lot of photographers too.
I think it's important. I mean, I think to develop as a photographer yourself, you do need to take inspiration from other photographers' work, and you need to understand why a picture is good, why a picture seems more effective than another picture. And eventually, when you study this more in detail and you get down to the physics and the science behind human vision, you actually can then, I can now look back at those pictures that were my favorites from when I was younger, and I can understand now why they worked, why they were effective pictures. Back then, I didn't really know. I just knew that I liked them, but now I know why I liked them. You see what I mean? There is kind of a science behind creating effective images, and it's a lot of stuff to do with human perception, color theory, composition, obviously, and also emotion and narrative in a picture, and all of these sort of separate segments that we know now. We basically use that information and apply it to build an effective picture. So essentially now, I don't really go and take photographs. I kind of design photographs based on this sort of information, if you know what I mean.
Right, because I noticed you do a lot of, I mean, you do black and white too, but a lot of your work is color, and I'm assuming it's because of the product and the commercial photography that you do. But see, I love black and white, but I'm such a color person. Just not, you can see the red wall behind me. I mean, I don't know. I struggle with that. I tend to like to do color because so many people like the black and white. But do you sell any of your work? Like, do you exhibit it? Or?
Yeah, I do sell work. Some people see certain images of mine, like that one behind at the moment, and then they're interested in buying that as a print, etc. So I do sell work, but I would say most of my work is color. One of the reasons, because you said, is because most of my work is advertising photography. Generally in advertising, they use color images. Obviously, when you go to black and white images, then none of the color theory stuff can apply anymore. So you can't use that trick to enhance an image. But what you're left with is contrast and tonal range. So you have to rely on other factors to make an image work. But in some ways, black and white work can be easier to create images because then you don't have the distraction of color. And sometimes in my own color work, I'll use very neutral backgrounds, always pretty much gray backgrounds, or very just faint light blue backgrounds. And then I just have kind of a blip of color or a high element of color in there on a sort of more neutral canvas. So yeah, I don't, I like black and white work, but I don't shoot a lot of black and white work myself.
Right. Okay. Yeah, and that makes sense because of what your focus is on. So, but I just think there's so many photographs you have that I would buy and put on my wall, for art, and I just wondered if you did that,
Yeah, I mean, I do, but they are quite expensive because we have to sort of think about a couple of things when you're selling your work, and it's almost sometimes people want to buy work as fine art work because they know that there's not many of them available. So you either run limited editions where you may only sell 5 or 10 prints of that particular image. And, in that respect as well, because you're not selling many, then the pricing can be higher on some of the work. Some of the images we can't sell either. I can't sell. There's lots of images that I shoot that have been shot for an advertising campaign or for a client. So therefore, the client is basically the owner of the image to some extent. And it would make it, I'd have to negotiate terms with the client to allow me to sell images. Obviously on my own personal work, then I can do what I want.
Right. That makes sense. Well, would you say, when I want to go back to, because I was curious, I know there's so many photographers out there, and to me, there's photographers and then there's artists of photography. And did you have that natural eye in the beginning, or did it sounds like you did, but I know.
Yeah, it's a tricky one, I think, because I think I had a natural eye in the sense that I was always comfortable with painting and drawing, and composition sometimes comes more naturally to some people than it does to others. But I think coming from a drawing and painting background for all my teenage years gave me a good understanding of composition, but it also gives you a good understanding of light, because when you draw anything or you paint anything, you have to consider, well, how is whatever you're painting has got to look like it's lit from something. So if you're painting a picture of a person, where is the light coming from? What is the light doing? What are the shadows doing, etc.? So you start to see light, even though you're not using light, you're just using paint. And then obviously when I moved into photography, I became very interested in how you can then control light to enhance an image or tell a story, etc. So in terms of it, I don't know if it comes completely naturally. I think some people have maybe got a little bit more, skill or aptitude to something than others. But generally, I think my aptitude for composition and light just came because that's what I was doing when I was a teenager, in that I was already drawing and painting. So I was already thinking about composition and light. So by the time I started photography, maybe I had a more natural eye or natural disposition for it. But maybe if I hadn't done the art and painting as a teenager, then maybe I wouldn't have. So I don't know. It's a kind of difficult one to know the answer to.
Yeah, okay, I understand. Well, what was your biggest challenge like when you were getting started as a professional photographer? Because to me, that's the hardest part.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's always the hardest part when you're getting started, because your dream when you're either a painter, an artist, or a photographer is you want to get your work shown. You want people to see your work, and you hope that they like your work. There aren't many photographers who just take pictures purely for themselves and they never want anyone else to see it. The reason for taking a picture is to display it and to show it. So back when I was doing pictures, I don't think the internet even existed then. So you didn't have the opportunity to put your work online or on Instagram or any of that stuff. So all you could do is have a portfolio and show your portfolio to people. When I first started in photography, doing it at 17, there was obviously quite a few years where it was just a hobby and a passion. I didn't start working in photography until my early mid-20s. And then I was working as a photojournalist. So I was traveling, shooting culture. And then the difficult thing was getting my work published. So I was making lots of approaches to newspapers, magazines, airline magazines, different cultural magazines, saying, hey, look, these are the pictures I've just shot. Here's the story I've written. And then they either say, yeah, we like it, or we don't like it. And then I built a bit of a relationship with a couple of different magazines as a freelancer. And I said, look, I'm going to go and shoot this story. I'm going to go and shoot this. And would you be interested? And they said, yeah, if the pictures are good, we'll be interested. So I guess the hardest part was getting the exposure. You're trying to get the exposure to get yourself known. And so marketing yourself was always a difficult thing when I was starting. That was always a big challenge. And then I switched from photojournalism. I did photojournalism for maybe sort of 3 or 4 years. And then I switched to advertising and commercial photography after I'd had a job assisting in a studio. So I was an assistant in a big studio for a while, and that experience introduced me to lighting. Then I started doing advertising photography for myself, and when I started my own studio doing photography for commercial photography, I think it was 1997 or 1998. So the biggest challenge then was, okay, how do I now get customers? How do I get business? So it was like, again, printing portfolios, marketing your work. By then the internet had happened, so could start to build websites and stuff. But yeah, I guess the business, because as a photographer, you don't like doing administration. You don't like doing paperwork. You don't like writing letters and emails or doing your accounts. But unfortunately, if you're in the business, you have to run it like a business. So and when you start, you're just working on your own. Now I work with several people work in the company. So I don't have to do that anymore, thankfully. But back then you had to do everything yourself, or you're distributing your marketing material. So that was what I always found the biggest challenge was the marketing and business side of it. And then I actually came to enjoy the marketing and business side for a while. Sort of it was almost like another challenge. But the problem that I find with it, and I think most photographers find the problem with it, is that when you have to deal with your business and your marketing. It means you're not taking pictures, and you're using a different part of your brain to deal with the business side compared to the creative side, and that can sometimes mess you about a little bit.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's true. I think all creative people have to struggle with that. So
yes.
I was glad that I'm glad you talked about that, because I saw in an interview that you did. I guess it was something on YouTube, and one of the questions they asked you was something about social media, and I'm not quoting you verbatim because I don't remember, but you're basically. I think your answer was to the effect that you weren't that, it didn't sound like you were that wild about social media. You felt like
I'm not.
Yeah.
No, you're right. I'm not. And we have to use it because we have a large following, and we have a large base, especially on the education side of our business. And obviously clients want to keep up with your website. And I think a website is certainly very important for my work, because my clients use my website to look at pictures and see what your work is, etc. But I think the problem with a lot of social media is that people get caught up in it, and then they get distracted by it, and then they're so worried about whether they're getting likes or whether they're getting exposure that they're not focusing on the main thing, which is creating great work. And in some instances, you can be posting on Facebook and Instagram and all of that, but where is it really going to get you if you haven't really built up a huge following, etc.? And it's getting harder and harder to grow big followings on these because so many other people are doing it. I think in many ways, especially from a business point of view, it's better to focus on creating great work as much as you can, building a good portfolio, and then having a personal relationship with your clients by going to see them, sending the material, calling them, seeing if you can get an appointment to show them that portfolio, rather than just randomly using social media and hoping someone's going to find you. I much prefer to do business like the old days, which was that more personal way, building personal relationships, and not worrying about social media as much, because I think in many ways social media can actually be a distraction, big distraction.
Yeah, I agree, and I have found that in my as a hairstylist and starting the photography business, I've never gotten anything really off of social media other than, like you said, likes or comments.
Yeah.
And it's very frustrating, and I'm kind of frustrated with social media. I use it for this show is what I mostly use it for, and that's pretty much what I do. But
yeah.
Anyway, I was curious as if you had a mentor in the beginning.
Not really. Not really any photography mentors.
Okay.
One of the areas that I did work in was in the dark room in printing. So I used to do a lot of, I was really enthusiastic back in the days of film about printing my own work. So I used to do black and white printing. I used to do color RA4 printing. I used to do Cibachrome printing, printing from my own transparency, my own slides. And I took a lot of advice and mentorship from a couple of people that I knew and worked with. One guy that taught me a lot about darkroom work was a guy called Don Pipperell. Another guy, John Fitzgerald, that I've worked with many times. So they kind of gifted me a lot of information on the techniques of darkroom printing, burning and dodging, exposure, and getting the best out of a photographic print. And then what's good about that is that information was very useful to me when I started using Photoshop, because the whole process of, you know, making part of an image more obvious than another part, or reducing or increasing contrast and drawing the eye to a certain place, these were all techniques that were applicable in the darkroom when you were a sort of a master darkroom printer. So I was working with these guys who really knew their stuff on printing, and that information was very useful to me as a photographer, and then also later in terms of using it for retouching as well.
Right, yeah. Because I hear people on the social media, they'll comment on a photographer's work and they'll say something looks Photoshop, and I find that frustrating because I was, you know, Photoshop is really like your digital darkroom.
It is.
And
It's a tool, and I think the misconception with it is how you use it and what you use it for. So from my perspective, I don't use it to do any comping works. There are some photographers that take one picture, take another picture, take several others, and then they cut them out, they join them together, and they do loads of things, and they can create a completely new picture that never existed from all these
yeah,
elements. Now, for me, that's not photography. That's
yeah,
basically, that's artwork. And I've got
yeah,
nothing against it, but it's not photography. Photography is the process of recording an image in a camera and then reproducing that image. Now, in the darkroom, we certainly used to change the color, change the contrast, make a bit lighter, a bit darker. And that's essentially all I do with my images now. There are some images where we have to apply Photoshop for advertising purposes. You've got to put something else a little bit different, or change
right,
the shape of something a little bit. But generally speaking, in 90% of my work, the work is just a little bit of shading, a little bit of contrast adjustment, and then coloration, saturation, that sort of thing. So again, like that shot there, that's what I shot. But yes, I might have enhanced the blue dress a little bit, enhanced the greens on the moss there, and stuff like that. Doesn't really have a great deal of Photoshop work at all. So I think it's how you use Photoshop and what you use it for. And I'm very much old school in that I started shooting advertising images on cameras that used film. So we used the big 5x4 inch cameras, single sheets of film. So you had to get it right in camera. So I was always, okay, this image is 2 images, for example. So that is actually 2 images joined together. So there is an example where I did use Photoshop, but and that image is another example. So everything in that shot is real apart from the shadow on the floor. Okay, that was put because she was balancing on a chair. But so there are occasions for special effects. There's no Photoshop in that, just a bit of contrast. So there are occasions where you need to use it, but as I say, 90% of my work relies on actual burning and dodging. Advertising images like that one, then obviously if the client dictates it because the idea demands it, then yeah, you've got to bring Photoshop in. There's no Photoshop work in that image where the model's throwing paint at me. That's actually what we captured in camera.
she literally threw that paint.
We had a big glass sheet in front of the camera, and then every time the paint hit the glass sheet, we had to wash the glass sheet and then do it again and again and again until we got the picture right.
Oh, God, that's wonderful.
So yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong with Photoshop, but I think the best Photoshop is when you don't notice there's any Photoshop.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I see it. Yeah, I like that. So good. So the girl that was falling, she was literally bouncing off of what did
No, she was balancing on a chair. Oh no, she wasn't balancing on a chair. We balanced her on a chair to create her shadow. But when we took the photo, she was jumping onto a gymnastic mattress.
Okay, yeah.
So she was jumping, and then we captured her jumping and falling, because that's the only way you're going to get the dress rippling correctly and the hair and everything happening. Because if she was just balancing, nothing would be flying in the air, nothing would be moving. So we had to have a jumping. So always when I do those type of shots, I'm making people jump or fall or whatever. But obviously she couldn't fall onto the hard floor, so she had to fall onto a soft surface. And I didn't want the soft surface in the photo. So then we take the soft surface away, then we balance her on a chair just to use the same lighting that was already there for her jumping, but then to capture the shadow that would have been on the floor. So we basically then combined the picture of the shadow with the picture of her jumping. So there are some instances where, of course, you can't get a model to jump and then crash onto a hard floor.
Yeah.
But that isn't Photoshop there. So that is actually the liquid hitting the bottle. So, you know, so where I can do it in camera, that is no Photoshop. There's just a bit of skin retouching, but no major Photoshop. So you know, wherever I can get it in camera, I choose to get it in camera. That one has had no Photoshop at all. But that's actually using a projector and projected light onto the model. So there's no Photoshop in that image either. So it's just really whatever you can do, I try to do it in camera.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I love all those. I love that one there where it looks like all the blinds going.
Yeah, all the lines across there.
Yeah, that's really, so I mean, I just love all of it. But I knew you had, because I'd watched some of on the education, so I knew you had done it. The only thing you did in Photoshop was just the normal stuff. I knew you had actually created that on the set. So that was great. I love them. I love them all.
Thank you.
But I was wondering, well, you kind of told me where a lot of your inspiration came from with some of the people, but do some of your ideas just come? Do you have like aha moments, or how? Because some of these ideas, how do you get them?
Yeah, I mean, I get lots of inspiration and lots of ideas from things that I see. I love watching movies. I love reading books. I love looking at other photographers' work. You're always trying to create something original, but there may be something that you see that gives you an idea or sparks something you saw in a movie or whatever. And then what I do is I try to take something from maybe an idea and then develop it into something different or my own idea. And then other times I can just be sitting watching television or out for a walk or whatever, and I just think, wow, that might make a great image. And then I go home and then I start sketching it out, thinking, right, how can I make that work? And that's it. And then a lot of my work isn't even my own ideas, because obviously if I'm working for advertising agencies or clients, it's usually their ad agency or their client or their art director. They're coming up with the ideas based on a marketing campaign, and they say, right, we need you to shoot this. Can you make that happen? And then I take their idea and then I say to them, yeah, we can do that all in camera, or we need to do this in Photoshop or whatever. And then it's my job to make their idea a reality, basically. So some of my work is obviously my own ideas, especially my own personal work and the work for the education side of the business. And then a lot of my work is other people's ideas. So, and then things like this shot here, sometimes I just experiment. I just get different materials and surfaces and colors and put them together. And I start thinking about shapes and what I can do. And yeah, so yeah, sometimes it's just like things pop in my head. And then other times I just get ideas that from life around you, basically.
Yeah, I like that image that when it went by, it looked like,
the orange panel
Orange, yeah.
coming in. Yeah.
Was that just panels of?
Yeah, it was acrylic, which I think in America you call macrolon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, macrolon or perspex. So they're just a big transparent, semi-transparent orange acrylic sheets, and I bracketed them at different angles, and then I had my model run and jump between them, and I wanted to create a kind of futuristic look. A lot of my fashion work has a sort of almost science fiction, futuristic look to it, because I was always inspired by science fiction movies. I grew up, you know, in the 70s and 80s as a kid. And, you know, during that time, in like 1977, Star Wars came out. Used to have Star Trek, Logan's Run, all these other sci-fi programs. And I was always very interested in the sci-fi things. And I think I'm quite attracted to that type of imagery. So therefore, in a lot of my fashion shoots, I often go for a sort of almost scientific, sci-fi, futuristic look in some of my images.
Yeah, I noticed that. I like it though. I do.
Good, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, I do. It's fun. Now, since I interview people in the arts, I'm always curious as to how people overcome creative blocks. What do you do when you go through a period where you're just like, you know, I think every artist does have a period where they're just not feeling creative. They have a block.
I drink some wine. No, you're right. I mean, it does happen. For me, it happens more for business reasons, because sometimes the business, you've got to do stuff to do with the business that then stops you shooting, or you've got loads of meetings or people to see, and then you get so caught up in all that your brain is tired, etc. And I think you just have to try and take a bit of time to enjoy the things. And like I said, I love watching movies and films. I watch movies and I study the lighting. I love the you know, the story, obviously, but I look at the lighting and the camera work. I read. One of the things that I do, you know, as a major hobby outside of photography is scuba diving, and I do that quite frequently. And that, you know, you're in your own little world, in your own little bubble, and you sometimes just sort of, it takes your mind away from it and away from photography, so that you're not thinking about it, and then it's almost like it cleans the slate, you know, so you can start again. So that I find therapeutic, to actually do something completely different that you enjoy, to take a break. And then there are times where I don't shoot any personal work for maybe a month or 2 months because I've been busy shooting client work. You kind of lose inspiration because you're so busy shooting client work that you kind of lose inspiration to shoot your own work. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think really taking a break from it and actually stepping back. Don't be afraid to say, you know what, I'm just not going to even think about it for 2 months. I'm gonna go and enjoy doing something else for a couple of months, so that you can clear your mind, you know. And then because I think if you put the word block on it, then you make it worse, you know. If you try and turn it into something else, like, actually, I'm not blocked, I'm just going to go and do something different. And then you don't feel it's a block. You can just relax and enjoy doing something else. And then when you're ready, I guess you can come back to it.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does. I like what you said. I do a lot of that. I get inspiration from watching a movie, or even when I read, like you said, or just out in life, seeing things. So that's really cool. I like that. Well, I noticed you in your bio, it said your family sometimes wishes you would put your camera down. How do they handle when you're gone a lot, or do they ever go with you, or?
Well, I've got two young kids, a boy and a girl, and I think that they're 9 and 7 years old. So they obviously don't mind the camera. As a matter of fact, they sometimes take the camera. I let them borrow my Canon, and then they go off and take pictures themselves in the garden and stuff, just playing around with it. My wife, before we had kids, I think she was a little frustrated with me. Every holiday I'd want to be going and maybe shooting stuff. And it ended up, what I did instead was I would just get up really early and shoot at sunrise, which is the best light anyway, and then not really bother shooting at sunset, because otherwise it'd be spoiling the holiday. So, but now, to be absolutely honest with you, I don't take a camera on holiday anymore, because when we go on holiday as a family with 2 small kids, I just don't have the time to take pictures, because it's just crazy with 2 kids, you know, having to handle everything. And then when I'm away for work, no, they don't come with me, because I'm obviously working, and a lot of my business trips are maybe just 3 days, 4 days, maybe a week maximum. So I make a lot of trips around the world, to different parts of the world, to Asia and Europe and wherever, but they're normally short trips. So when I'm on those trips, then I'm usually working.
Okay, well, that's not bad. I thought maybe you were gone longer than that. So that's
no.
Yeah.
I'm gone quite frequently, but for short periods of time.
Okay. Well, what would you say has been the most exciting thing about your career so far, or part of it?
That's a tricky one. I kind of like, I think the whole thing for me is exciting, because there's 2 exciting things. One is running a business and having staff and making sure that you try and maintain that business, and that everyone's enjoying themselves and everyone's, you know, enjoying their work, because obviously work takes up so much of your life that it's far better that you're doing something that you enjoy. And obviously I feel very lucky that I've been successful doing what I enjoy. But then on the other hand, you make your own luck, you know, because I've really, really worked hard at this. And I, you know, back when I started out, I was working 60, 70 hours every week, you know, trying to create images, doing your own marketing, doing everything. And I don't work as much as that now, but, you know, it was that constant working ethic, if you like, that has, I guess, helped get me the success that I've got now. But I'm still excited by every new project. So it's kind of like, I don't think there's been one thing that's been exciting, because I'm always excited about the next photo shoot. So if we've got an idea for a photo shoot, and I say, right, I want to try this, and I sketch it out, then I'm super excited about that next photo shoot. I'm like, I can't wait to do it. And I'm as excited about that photo shoot as I was about one from 10 years ago. It's just every single new project is exciting to me. So it's just like a continuation. And that's what I really, really love about my work. I mean, there's lots of things I don't like about my work, such as long distance travel, or, you know, doing administration and lots of meetings and things like that. But it's all worth it in the fact that I can still continue to create for a living. And, you know, I have this ability to work on some pretty decent projects. So yeah, there isn't one thing that's been most exciting. The whole thing for me has just been enjoyable. There's obviously lots of moments where it hasn't been enjoyable. I mean, there was one period in my career some years ago where we were in difficult financial problems, because with economic crash, people cutting their advertising budgets. So all of a sudden your overheads are still there, and then your revenue is less. So a lot of stress sometimes from a business perspective, and you just have to sort of find ways to make it through, you know?
Right. Yeah, I understand. Well, because seems like when they started using, a lot of companies started using those stock photos, that
was that was a big hit for a lot of photographers.
Yeah.
Was that I mean, there was that main hit. The first hit was that stock photo libraries became very, very popular, and instead of getting commissioned to make an image, they were now buying a ready-made image that suited the advertising brief. And advertising agencies got into this habit of starting to use stock images just because it was very easy. And that lasted for quite a few years. And then it meant that you had less commissions. But then what happened is it kind of went full circle again. And then everyone was using the same stock images. Like one business had the same stock image, another business had, and then some of the big businesses realized like, oh, we can't do this because so-and-so's using that image and we're using it and it doesn't look good for our business. So then a lot of my clients went back to commissioning original photography again. Then the next major challenge, I think, for commercial photographers was obviously this growth in interest in photography from when digital arrived. And we had a lot of new photographers that became, apparent on the market, and they obviously loved photography. And then they decided, hey, I want to do this as a job, and I want to, be able to work doing this as my career. So all of a sudden, you had this huge influx of more people wanting to do your job. Right. And at that point, I thought, well, this could be a problem because they're obviously not at the high end. At the high end, some of the more technical studio commercial advertising images would be too complex for them to have that knowledge straight away. They wouldn't understand how to do that. So that work would still be your domain, if you like. But then a lot of the sort of more rudimental, basic photography, your bread and butter work would start to get taken away. And that's what started to happen in the industry. So you had this level of work that stayed there and this level of work that started to get taken away to cheaper photographers. So what I did as a photographer and what many other photographers did is we let that work go and forgot about it. And then we raised our prices on the specialty work. So we just became more expensive for doing the stuff that was more complicated and more difficult. And that was actually quite a nice thing, because then effectively we could end up earning the same money as we were earning before, but we actually weren't even doing as much work. But at the same time, I was still concerned in some ways about this huge enthusiasm for photography. I mean, there's always been an enthusiasm for photography from amateurs, for hobbyists, even in the days of film. Lots of camera magazines, back in the day of film cameras, there was maybe about 4 main photography magazines in the UK. And then at the height of the digital period, there was 20 camera magazines. So wow. You could tell from, this huge upsurge of interest in photography because of digital and because you could see the picture instantly, you didn't have to pay for film and processing. So what I did was, from a business point of view, I thought, maybe I should start looking at, seeing if we can do something with this. And I had lots of people that were learning photography or buying digital cameras, and they were coming to me and saying, hey, Karl, love your work. Do you ever do any workshops? Do you ever do any training? And so I thought, hey, I've never done a workshop. So I decided to give it a try. And these workshops that I ran, they were full. I couldn't do enough of them. And people were saying, yeah, I heard you did workshops. We want to do. And then it was at that time that I realized the demand was very high for learning. And that's when we decided to launch our training side of the business. So I partnered up with a media company. And then we started filming our training to produce and sell on DVD format. So we used to sell training on DVD format 10 years ago, and then we moved to online training instead. So in some ways, for me, the growth in interest in photography by amateurs was actually a benefit for me, because our business went downhill on commercial photography in 2008 when the economic crisis hit. Right. But what that did was that meant we had some time available. So it was like, okay, we haven't got any work on this week. What do we do? So then we decided, well, let's get this training project. Let's start seeing if we can make that work. So we started filming shoots that we were coming up with, landscape shoots, portrait shoots, anything that we thought would be of interest. And it was actually a blessing that we had the economic crash in some ways, Otherwise, I would have just carried on full-time commercial photographer, so busy that I would never have had time to do the education. And it was the economic crash that allowed me to have some free time to develop the education business. And now the education side of my business is a very big part of my business. I spend about half of my time on the education business and half of my time on the commercial side of the business. And I generally don't even take any new commercial clients on, because I sort of work for my existing commercial clients that I've worked for the last 10, 15 years or so. It's only if we get a new commercial client where the project seems really interesting that we actually say, yeah, okay, we'll take a look at it. So, you know, I kind of did a bit of juggling with my business. It's like, you know, one thing went down, let's see if we can make another thing go up. So it's just, again, it's just looking at the supply and demand and trying to figure out how you could, you know, this is the thing I think with business, any business side of things, is if something negative happens, try to see why it happened and what the reasons were. So for example, in my situation, we were losing business because of the economic crash, and we were losing the lower end of the photography business because more people were interested in photography. So rather than just sulk about it, I thought, well, what can we do if more people are interested in photography? So it was like, okay, we can help those photographers and at the same time see if we can make a business from that. So it's always trying to look at things objectively and see what you can do. So it's kind of like you've got to try and solve the problem. And that's very sort of instinctive to me, because in commercial photography, especially in advertising photography, your work is often about solving a problem. You have to figure out how to make something look real or look amazing. You're often solving a problem of making a picture. So the whole problem solving thing is I think a key part of you know, running a business successfully.
Yeah. Well,
sorry, I was talking a lot then.
No, but that was good, because that answered, I mean, that's been a big concern of mine, because there's so many out there now, and you've got to figure out a way to make you utilize like your gift as a photographer, but also just find a way to stand out, I suppose.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that's good. That was actually good to hear, because I was having some of those feelings yesterday, kind of being down on it. So that's very good. I'm glad you talked about that. That was perfect. So, but is there a dream shoot, a dream place or idea that you've had always sitting there that you?
There is, yeah. I mean, I've been very lucky with my work that I get to shoot a lot of great stuff, but I would love to go to Namibia, and there's a place in Namibia which is on Western African coast, and it's where the desert meets the Atlantic Ocean, and basically you have these huge sand dunes and desert that just basically joins to the Atlantic Ocean, and it's a very barren, empty place. But what there is a lot of old shipwrecks, and the shipwrecks are now in the desert, because what's happened is the desert has kind of moved forwards into the ocean. So some of the old shipwrecks that were on the beach are now in the desert. So it's quite bizarre. You know, they're now several hundred meters into the desert part. And I'm fascinated by shipwrecks from diving. So now seeing a shipwreck, but a ship in the desert, looks really bizarre and really surreal. And I've never been there. I've only seen it in pictures, because you can go there. It's called the Skeleton Coast. And I've seen it in a few documentaries. But I would love to try and do a fashion shoot there, where I had like a couple of models with, you know, beautiful dresses blowing in the desert scene, but with these shipwrecks in the background, because they just look so surreal. You know, it's just like, why is there this big rusty ship in the desert? It's like, it's such a juxtaposition, because you know boats are meant to be in the sea. You don't expect a boat to be in the sand. So,
Yeah.
I at some point in the future, if costs can justify it, because it's a very expensive place to get to. Now you can imagine getting there with like 2 models, makeup artist, hair, clothes, a crew. It would cost a lot of money to do this.
Yeah.
So you know, at some point in the future, we may try and run it as a workshop or something where we take a group of photographers, and then we can, obviously the group of photographers paying to go will be able to afford for us to take the group there and do some sort of workshop there. But I haven't given it any more thought than that. It's just an idea of something that I would like to do as the dream shoot. Yeah.
Yeah, oh God, I think that would be a lot of fun.
It would be yeah,
yeah,
fun.
but you could sell it as artwork and
yeah, maybe. Yeah.
But I saw a couple of your wildlife photos shooting across the screen a little while ago, and since I know a lot of wildlife photographers,
which one did you see? Because I don't really shoot any wildlife. I've got.
Well, you had a hawk in the air.
Yeah. I've got
then the blackbird, that black bird.
Oh yeah, there was this hawk, but this hawk was is a Harris hawk, which actually it's an American bird. Lives in the American desert. I shot this in my studio. So
in your studio?
Yeah. So this was all lit with studio lighting. So a friend of mine, his brother-in-law keeps birds of prey. He's a falconer or whatever you call them, and he's got this very tame Harris hawk that he uses for hunting, and it's very well trained. And I said, can I photograph it? And I said, can we make it fly in my studio? And he said, yeah, we can give it a go. And we set up the shot in my studio. Wow. And we set up a feeding post where the bird would fly to. And then he let go of the bird, and we knew where the bird was going to land. So we set all the lighting and the focus point to that point, and then captured the bird landing to that point each time. As a matter of fact, there's a video on my YouTube channel of how we did it. So okay. If anyone wants to see it, if they look up on the Karl Taylor YouTube channel and search for the Harris hawk video, they can see it. They can see the shoot when we did it actually. But other than that, I don't really shoot. I don't really shoot.
There was a close-up of a black bird.
Oh, it's the same bird.
It's the same bird. Okay.
It's the same one. Yeah, it was a close-up on the same bird. So yeah, no, that's.
But I still think it's cool because you don't get that opportunity to shoot wildlife with the studio lighting, and I think that's
no, you're
really
right.
neat.
But actually, the guy that I'm running the workshop with Tim Flack, that's what he does. Is he shoots animals with studio lighting. So he goes to specialist zoos where they've got breeding programs for panda bears or different animals, and then he gets permission from the zoo to put a black backdrop and studio lights, and then the animal, and then he photographs the animal like a fine art portrait. So I mean, he does shoot stuff in the wild as well, but that's his speciality. That's not my speciality. He's the guy that does horses and other animals and stuff. Yeah, and most of my work is product photography.
Yeah, okay, because I was wanting to photograph my horse with studio lighting. I couldn't bring her in the studio. I'd have to do it outdoors, but I haven't figured out how I would do that because I wouldn't want her knocking over my lights.
Yeah, you definitely need to have an assistant helping you.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'll figure it out. But anyway, I love to photograph her, so it's just one of my favorite things. So, do you have a favorite thing to photograph? Did I ask you?
No, I think I like photographing fashion, beauty stuff, but I mostly enjoy photographing products. And some people might say, well, it's a bit boring if you're just photographing a bottle of whiskey or a pair of sunglasses or cosmetics or whatever. But for me, I find it fascinating because generally these items are very boring. You know, you pick them up in the shop and you look at them and they don't look really exciting. So
Yeah.
I find it amazing, the process of trying to make them look desirable, trying to make them look exciting. And that is a challenge that you have to overcome with composition, perspective, lighting, especially. And it's that challenge that I enjoy the most. So basically making something boring look interesting. And what we call it is making the mundane look magical. So
Yeah.
so that's what I enjoy doing the most.
What I'd like to see you do is photograph a beautiful tiered cake that was made by a chef and make it, I don't know, because it's something I've wanted to do, but I don't know how to do it because I'm like, well, you'd have to buy that 3-tiered cake.
I'd probably eat it before I photographed it.
That's what I would do.
Yeah, I think that would be quite a difficult one, actually, just thinking of that visually, because anything that's on a tier going up like this, then you're dealing either with a long vertical portrait, or you have to look down on it and see the detail, but then you don't see the tiers as easily. So things like that are actually more complex to shoot. Generally, a single level object can often be easier to handle. As soon as you've got like multiples of things like that, then you've got more problems to actually deal with. So more of a challenge.
Well, I bet you could do it.
Well, I'm sure I would find a way, but yeah, it would be more difficult, I guess, than a normal food shop would be for me, you know.
Yeah. Well, I've still got a couple more questions. I don't know how much time you have, so I can.
No, you go ahead. That's fine. Absolutely fine.
Okay. I was curious as to how the opportunity of Hasselblad, being an ambassador for all these companies, how that came to you. And
okay, so the Hasselblad thing, just to give your viewers an outline. So I shoot with a Hasselblad camera. They may not have heard of Hasselblad. Hasselblad is one of the major professional level cameras. It's a medium format camera, so it's a bigger digital sensor than Canons or Nikons. I shoot with a Canon and Nikon and stuff as well, but the Hasselblad has a larger sensor. So my camera sensor is 100 megapixel on the Hasselblad H6, and that extra detail and tonal range suits advertising photography and product photography especially. I started using a Hasselblad camera when it was the H1, so it's the H6 now, and I had my first Hasselblad H1 back in 2004 or 2005, and Hasselblad obviously saw some of the work I was shooting with the camera, and then they approached me about using some of my images. Said, could we publish some in our magazine? They had this magazine called Victor, and obviously different features on their website, and that relationship just grew from there. And then they came to me one day and said, we've got a certain number of appointed ambassadors globally that we like to represent our brand, that are kind of people that use our brand for their work. So they said, would you be happy to do it? And I said, well, sure, but you know, how much work is involved? What do you need me to do? And they said, well, now and again, we'd like you to maybe do a talk presentation, or we'll fly you to some city somewhere and do a presentation and talk, or we want you to provide us with images, blah blah blah. And you know, I said, okay, but what do I get out of it? So they said, well, you get a good discount on future equipment, etc. We don't get the equipment for free. You know, we still have to pay a major amount of money for it. But it's just a nice relationship. You respect the brand's history. And working with these guys, because they're a Swedish company and they're really passionate about creating tools that make the best possible images. So yeah, that relationship just sort of grew from there, and I'm an ambassador for them. But I'm also an ambassador for Broncolor Lighting Company, because I use Broncolor Lighting, and also for Manfrotto, who make tripods and lighting stands and supports, because also use that. So I'm only ever an ambassador or spokesperson for brands that I've been using for many years, because we get, you know, because we have a large social media following, we get lots of companies send us stuff or ask us to say something. And I say, look, unless I use this stuff or I know that it's any good, I'm not going to endorse it, or I'm not going to say something positive about it, because I don't know what it is. I don't understand it. So,
Right.
but yeah, no, the ambassadorial roles are quite nice because you get to meet the other ambassadors, and some of them you kind of, you know, their work, or you respect their work. And you know, there's another ambassador, Hasselblad ambassador, called Sales Chong. He's a Chinese photographer. He does amazing fashion and beauty and wedding fashion work, really amazing stuff. And I've met him through doing presentation in China for Hasselblad, and you kind of get to meet new people and know new people. So yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's quite interesting as well.
Yeah. Okay. No, I was looking at the Hasselblads and I was like, oh my God, $45,000 for a camera.
Well, they're not all that expensive, actually. What I think, yeah, the most expensive one might be around $40,000, which often comes up. You know, people say, oh, how do you justify a camera that expensive? But actually, when I bought my first Hasselblad back in 2004, 2005, it was about $30,000 then, and that was 13 years ago. So it was, you know, probably more expensive then than it is now. But actually, at the time, my studio was spending at least $28,000-$30,000 a year on film processing, darkroom, printing costs. So actually, by buying the Hasselblad, that then gave me the quality of what I was getting from medium format film. I didn't have to spend any more money on film. So actually, my profit margin went up because I still charged the client the same amount of money, but I didn't have any film costs or developing costs anymore. So buying my first Hasselblad was largely a business decision that made sense. And then one good thing that Hasselblad have got is that if you stay in the program, you can upgrade your camera when they bring a new one out, and they will buy your old camera back from you at a pretty good value. So you don't have to pay the full price for the new camera, because they'll take your old camera off of you, and then you save significantly on the new one. And then I think what they do is they then sell the old cameras at a lower price to universities and different places, etc. So once you're kind of in, you're in. And then the other thing is that there are a lot of photographers that obviously can't afford these cameras because they just can't justify it. But you know, some of the shoots that we work on at this level, the budgets for these shoots are very high, the responsibility is very high, the amount of people working on the project. And in some ways, the advert, where the advert is going to appear, say like as a billboard or in a newspaper, in a national newspaper, the cost of just that page is far more than the photo shoot itself. So the photo shoot can be expensive, but from the client's point of view, that's actually not the major cost compared to the actual advertising costs. So the money that we earn from these larger shoots, we have to ensure that the quality is the absolute best quality. And also, often the art directors, they want you to shoot a little bit wider so that they can choose where they crop the photo, or they want to crop in maybe tighter on one bit, maybe use another bit. So then you need these higher resolution cameras so that they can do that. You know, it makes, but that, I mean, don't get me wrong, I still shoot with a Canon occasionally because the Hasselblad is a slow camera. It cannot take pictures very quickly. The focusing is slower. So if I'm doing more of a reportage project where you're photographing people or lifestyle and things are happening more quickly, then I will switch to the 35mm stuff.
Yeah, I noticed you use your Canon a lot on so that was great. That was good. But there's so many distractions now on the internet, and I was just curious because I get confused sometimes, and I know other people do. Like there's Nick collection, and of course you got Portrait Pro, and there's others that I don't how do you feel about these things? That do you
well, I agree that a lot of them can be distractions. I don't use any other software other than Photoshop, and the software that comes with the Hasselblad is called Focus software, and that's like Lightroom. It's like a raw camera thing, and it's when you take the photo in the Hasselblad, it appears on the computer because you're shooting tethered, and that's basically your raw file processor. So that's similar to Capture One, which is also a raw file processor, and so is Lightroom. So I only use Focus software and Photoshop. I don't use any other software at all. I guess really it's kind of knowing what you want to achieve. You know, it's like, I'm going to make this picture. I'm going to light it a certain way. I'm going to do this. I'm going to create the image. I'm going to do as much of it as in camera. I'm then going to do a bit of color contrast processing to the raw file. I then export that raw file as a 16-bit TIFF or PSD. Then I do my final Photoshop burn and dodge work in Photoshop. And then the client gets that picture. So I don't have a need for any other type of software. Some landscape photographers might benefit from things like the Nick collection, if they're doing black and white especially. Some portrait photographers or maybe wedding photographers might benefit from Portrait Pro because it speeds up the skin and beauty retouching. It automates it. But for me, that automated type beauty retouching doesn't look good enough for big stuff, but it might look good enough for a wedding album. So I think you have to choose the tools for, you know, the type of work that you do. But yeah, I think you're right. A lot of photographers kind of, they look at some of the software and they think, oh, this, I'm going to use this. I'm going to try using this because it will fix my problems. But it won't fix your problems. You have to kind of try and work better and work more effectively and shoot better so that you don't have to do as much post-production work.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, I'm glad I asked you that because I was curious. Because stuff keeps coming out, and I'm like, it's
it is distracting. I think a lot. I mean, it's a little bit like social media. It's just another thing that you've got to think about, another thing you've got to look at. But actually, when you think about the process of making images, you make obviously the main part of the image you make in camera, and how good that image looks. Like for example, some people will say, oh, I'll make that bit there a little bit lighter in Photoshop afterwards. And I say, well, why? Why not make it lighter with your lighting? Why not get your lighting better so that you don't have to do that in Photoshop afterwards? And so I kind of do everything I can to make the image as perfect as possible in camera. And then I've got virtually no time in Photoshop or much less time in post-production. And at the end of the day, you need to know what you want the image to be. So if you started off with an idea in your mind and you want it to go from there to there, you also can figure out what tools you need to make it do that. And I know the only tools I need are the camera and Photoshop to get it there. I don't need any other tools for the type of work that I do. But that's not saying that, as I said, a wedding photographer or a landscape photographer might find other tools more useful to them.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. That really does. So yeah, I'm glad I asked that. So there was something I wanted. Oh, this is a big problem I know it was a problem for me, but a lot of people, when you start, how does a photographer choose their price schedule? Because it is so across the board, and especially now with all these, I don't know, with all the
I mean, there's a big difference in prices from some photographers to other photographers, and my pricing now is way different to what it was when I started 20 years ago. When I started doing commercial photography in 97, 98, I already had worked as an assistant in other studios. So I had an idea of what those studios were charging their clients for their work. So that was the first thing that I understood. Then when I came back to my home and wanted to set up my own studio, I then had to look at the competition, and I had to look at my competitors and say, right, is their work better than mine? Is it worse than mine? And what are they charging? So, you know, with a few sneaky phone calls and some pretend emails, etc., you can kind of get to find out what they were charging. And then you use that as the base benchmark, if you like, of where you're going to charge. So if you felt that your work was better and you could do a job more efficiently or quicker, then maybe you could charge a little bit more. But obviously when you're starting out, you might want to charge a little bit less so that you seem a little bit more attractive. But the other hand is sometimes if you price yourself too low, they might think you're not as good. So
exactly,
you know, so it's usually a good idea to come in at the same price point as the rest of the market that you think you're comparable to. And then from there onwards was just incremental price increases with as you grew as a photographer and as your client list grew, and then, you know, maybe every year or 2 years there'd be a percentage increase or new services added and things like that, and then eventually you'd win bigger clients. So I won like a bigger client, and I thought, wow, this client is big. And I know they were using so-and-so before me, and I know he was way more expensive than I. So you adapted your price to suit this new project. So when you put your quotation in, you thought, right, I'm going to make sure I add a little bit on there. And yeah, you kind of grow, you know, you kind of grow your business from, you know, being a sort of a cafe price to being a top restaurant price, you know. So, you know, it's just one of those things. How you discover what your pricing is, though, it's really, it's supply and demand. You have to look at what level you think you're at, and then see who else is in your level and what they're charging, and use that as the starting benchmark is what I did.
Yeah, okay, because I tried making the phone calls, and I guess I'm not a good liar, because they start getting suspicious.
well, one of the things, I shouldn't say this, but one of the things that I did was that I had a few friends that were sort of in business or management level in a company or something, and I said, could you do me a favor? Could you send an email to this photographer and ask, say you're interested in having some business shots done or some concept images created for a campaign or whatever, and can you see if they can gauge some pricing from them? And, you know, these were good friends of mine that worked in these other companies. They said, sure, no problem, it's just an email. So obviously then the competitor photographer would respond, and then you would be able to discover something of their pricing. But I mean, it's a little bit cheeky, but it's business, you know. You have to start somewhere, and you know, I know you know what it's like. You know, certain supermarkets and certain stores, they send people to the other supermarket to look at what they're charging this week, and everyone does it, you know.
Okay, good. Well, I've just got a couple more questions. I wanted to, because I don't know anything about these mirrorless cameras, and I didn't have a lot of time to research it. But what is the big rage, and is this just another distraction?
Well, yeah, it is a distraction. I mean, mirrorless cameras are no different to any normal DSLR camera, except they just don't have a mirror in them. The mirror in a DSLR basically means the light hits the mirror and it bounces up through the prism, and then when you look through the viewfinder and you're looking through your camera, you're seeing the light that's coming through the lens. Now, a mirrorless camera takes exactly the same photo, exactly the same sensor, same quality of lenses, all the rest of it. The only thing it doesn't have is it doesn't have the mirror anymore. The light comes through the lens and it hits the sensor, and you have a little mini TV screen. So you're not looking at the real light anymore. You're looking at a television screen instead. And all that means is that they've been able to make the camera slightly smaller because it doesn't need the big prism on top and it doesn't need the mirror mechanism anymore. So the camera can be a little bit smaller. But in terms of picture quality, it's no different. It doesn't take a better picture. It doesn't do anything different. It's exactly the same as the previous technology. The thing is that people are going crazy about it because they've heard something or read something that mirrorless is the new thing. But they don't really understand the physics that actually it doesn't take a better picture. It doesn't do anything different. It's exactly the same. And actually, for me personally, I'm not so keen on mirrorless cameras. I've used them, but I don't like looking at a picture that isn't the real picture. So with a mirrorless camera, you're looking at a TV screen and it looks okay. But I'm always been used to looking at the real light coming in, the real photons, if you like, and seeing the real world as it looks. And that's what I enjoy doing. So for me, I wouldn't choose a mirrorless camera because I don't feel so connected to the world when I look through a mirrorless camera, because I want to see the real scene, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And
I don't know. It may be one of those things where people love mirrorless cameras and they become the most popular one, that the manufacturers may stop making DSLR cameras, which may happen, but I hope it doesn't, because I still like to look at the actual light coming through the camera. And, you know, to be honest, the mirrorless cameras are only about, 20%, 25% smaller. So it's not a huge difference. It's just, they're just a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter. So people, obviously no one wants to carry a huge heavy camera around, or most people don't. So maybe that is the attraction. Me personally, my Hasselblad is very heavy. It's 3 times the size of any other camera. My tripods are really heavy. I'm quite happy carrying heavy equipment. I don't mind, but each to their own.
Yeah, well, I like that. I'm a small frame person, and I don't know if it's a mental thing maybe, but I like the feel. I like my heavy lens. I like my camera. I like the substance of it, and I don't want to hold like something like my phone,
Yeah.
I don't know, but that's just me too. But okay, so what great advice would you give to other photographers maybe who are just getting started, or even if they're a little further along, just, I don't know, maybe to give them hope to overcome that fear of all this competition today?
I suppose the most important thing is the passion. Okay, you have to remain passionate about what you do. So you have to, if you want to be a professional photographer, or even if you just enjoy doing it as a hobby, but you want to get really good at it, you have to be passionate about it first of all. And usually the most passionate your most passionate thing is what you like shooting the most. So if you like shooting sports photography, then concentrate on that. If you like shooting portraits and beauty shots, concentrate on that. If you like doing fashion, but concentrate on your passion, focus on your passion, and aim. You have to aim for perfection. I know that sounds odd, right? You'll never achieve perfection, okay? Because if everyone achieved perfection, it would be boring.
Right.
But you have to kind of aim for perfection, and then you have to then settle for slightly less than perfection. But what I see when I see other photographers is sometimes they make compromises. And often those compromises, unfortunately, are due partly to laziness. They just don't want to put in that little bit of extra work. They don't want to do that little bit of extra research. They don't want to spend that little bit more time. So if you take, for example, the most successful wildlife photographers, they're the ones that don't sit in the Jeep. They're the ones that sit in a hide, in camouflage, with the right lenses and all the camouflage gear all over them. And they're the ones that wait for 8 hours for an animal to come to the feeding hole, to the, you know, the watering hole or whatever. And they're the ones that got as close as possible. And so they had more passion. They had more tenacity. They had, you know, they went that little bit further. So the amount of effort that you put in is usually what will give you more results. Okay. And it's just like it's just kind of like a natural sort of balance. The more work you put in, the more effort, the more passion, the more tenacity, then the more likely you are to be successful at getting the image that you wanted to get. Now, for example, I get people that say, that like for product photography especially, they say, I want to do this shot of a bottle of wine or a bottle of whiskey or perfume or something, and I spent 2 hours on it and it still doesn't look quite right. And I said, I might spend 18 hours on one photo if I have to, you know.
Wow.
It's not about, oh, I should be able to do it in 2 hours. I can do some shots in 2 to 3 hours to a really high level, but you should be thinking not about, I need to get it done in 3 hours. You need to be thinking, I need to get it done, and it needs to take as long as it needs to take to get it done how I wanted it to look, okay? And then if you're not sure how you want it to look, then you need to study more. You need to study other photographers' work that you really like. And you need to identify what it is in that picture, that what makes it so good. And then compare that to the work that you're doing and saying, why does my work not look like that work? What is it that's different? And then you start to notice things with the lighting or, you know, small reflections or details. And every time you shoot something, I see so many photographers, they shoot something and they go, oh, that's not quite right. I'll probably fix that in Photoshop after. Or that label's not quite straight. So, you know, I don't know what to do about that. Now if that was me and that label wasn't quite straight, and like when we shoot products for companies, we always ask for blank bottles and the labels separately, so that we can always put the labels on ourselves. So the labels are always perfectly straight and in the perfect condition. If the liquid in the bottle doesn't look the right color, we'll take the liquid out and we'll change the liquid. So we just put more effort in. There's more work done. It does take longer, but because there's more work done, the result is better. So you have to basically have enough passion and tenacity and love what you're doing enough that you will persevere until you get the result. And it really is about quality, not quantity. So you have many photographers that try to shoot lots of pictures thinking that they'll have more pictures. And I choose to shoot less but higher quality. And if you like, even if you're an amateur photographer, and let's say you only had your weekends to shoot on, right? You only had a weekend. Let's say you could turn out an amazing photo on Saturday, an amazing photo on Sunday. Then by the end of the year, you would have 104 amazing photos. Now, even if you only had 50 amazing photos, because you only manage one photo each weekend, but you spent 2 days to get that one amazing photo, you would still end up with 52 amazing photos at the end of the year. And 52 amazing photos on your website is far better than 200 average photos, you know?
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's really about just spending more time on the craft and just re-examining what you're doing, re-looking at what you're doing, and you know, and the one thing you learn from that process, and I certainly learned from that process, especially in the last 10 years, is that the more effort you put in, and then the better result you get out, then the next time you come to do it, it's actually easier to do it because you now understand what you have to do, because you learned something new yourself by trying to solve the problem. So you're basically trying to solve problems. So if you think, for example, for the wildlife photographer, what's the problem that he's got to solve? He's too far away from the animals. So he goes close to the animals, they run away, they're scared. So he camouflages himself. So he goes camouflage. The problem is the animals don't show up and he's hungry, he goes home. So how does he solve that problem? He has to stay there for longer. So you have to solve each problem and you have to think of a solution to that problem. And then by putting that extra work in, you will get the result, but it does take longer. But it does mean you get a much better result. So it is a case of the more work you put in, and it's always about solving problems. I think it's kind of like figuring out what you want and how do I get from there to there, and what will the problems be. And every time you solve one of these problems, you learn something, and then the next time you need to get from there to there, you can actually do it quicker and still get a good result. So that's my ethos, if you like, on how to improve yourself as a photographer. And if you concentrate on that, then your work gets better. And then the work that you put out there gets noticed more because it's more effective and a higher quality work. So you could say, for example, I'm going to take 1 year away from social media and away from all that stuff. And I'm just going to concentrate on the craft of producing amazing images. And I'll come back to social media in a year's time when I've got 52 new amazing images to add, and then go from there. And I think that would be far more effective for you than rushing around trying to keep posting stuff and everything being average, and rather than everything being amazing. So I would implore any photographer who wanted to really make it to concentrate on the skill and the craft and more depth, if you like, in the work, and that always requires more tenacity and more problem solving.
No, that's real good advice. That's good. That really helps a lot. I mean, that makes a lot of sense to me, for sure.
Yeah,
no, I understand it. So I'm glad you took the time to explain that, because that really helps me. So, well, I hate to end this today, but because I know you're busy, but I have thoroughly enjoyed this. This has just been a blessing to me, Karl. Yeah, this has been a lot of fun. So
been fun as well.
Good. I want to thank you for taking the time to be here today. Is there anything you want to mention? Because we really didn't talk about your courses, how people
No. I mean, if people want to see my work, it's the website that you've got behind you, which is KarlTaylor.com. That's my commercial work. And then, as you said, we also have an education channel where we teach other photographers and other professional photographers how to improve. And that's an online video format, and that is KarlTaylorEducation.com. So people can check that out as well, and take a look there. But no, I mean, obviously, I hope people enjoyed listening to my point of view. Sometimes I talk a little bit too much.
No, I love it. No, I love it. This is my passion, so I love it. And
good.
We have to learn from people that are much better than us, and that's the way I look at it. So it's
and we're all learning. I mean, I've been learning still, even recently, over the last 10 years and right up to now, you kind of think new things and stuff. So as long as we're always happy to keep learning, then that's always a good thing.
Yeah, that is. So I'm excited. So, and I'm really enjoying your course, and I'll keep promoting it and sharing about it.
Well, thank you very much. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And if you've got any questions, then don't be afraid to ask in the comment sections.
Okay, I won't. So don't hang up. I want to thank the viewers too for their continued support. And you can see the replay of this interview on Tamarah's Closet's YouTube channel, as well as I'll be putting it in tamarahscloset.com. So make sure you visit Karl's site at karltaylor.com and learn more about his educational programs and workshops. And he has live workshops as well. So share this replay so that I can continue to celebrate this really talented photographer and artist, because his work deserves to be shared. And I know he's helping a lot of people. So do share. Join me in a couple weeks on the 21st, because I have a live interview with an Italian singer, Stefano Cecchi. I know I'm having trouble pronouncing his name, but he's a really nice guy, so I know he'll forgive me. And to your own success out there, keep rocking it. And Wildflower says hey to my friend, and we'll see you next time.